In our first tale of dark temptation, a serpent in the garden.
When you pick up a serpent, you actually have death in your hand.
That will lead one couple into temptation.
She was scared. She was scared the whole time I was talking with her.
And deliver them to evil.
Oh, God, it hurt.
And later,
we'd never come across a crime scene like this.
a killer with a calling card.
What does it mean? What is this killer telling us?
Reveals an obsession out of control.
This is something that had been developed for quite some time.
So abnormal, so bizarre. The psycho at its prime.
In the backwoods of Alabama in 1991, a desperate woman stumbles down a lonely lane.
She crawled and walked from her house. She hadn't had anything to eat for a couple of days.
She's on her last legs.
She was in pretty bad shape.
With bizarre markings on her left hand.
There was a place on the back of her hand that had been bitten, was swollen. Her whole arm was swollen.
What has gone on in this Scottsboro home?
He's gonna kill me.
She felt like that if he did find her, he would kill her.
Paramedics learn Darlene Summerford has been bitten by a rattlesnake. Not once, but twice. She's rushed to the hospital for a last-minute injection of anti-venom. Without it, Darlene wouldn't be alive today to tell her tale.
If I hadn't been praying and God hadn't been with me, I would have died.
From her hospital bed, Darlene starts to unravel what happened that night.
She was scared. She was scared the whole time I was talking with her. You could tell the look in her eyes.
Darlene tells Detective Clarence Bolt her snake bites were no accident. So Scottsboro police decide to take a poke around Darlene's property.
He unlocked the shed, and we went in, and we got somewhere around 12 or 14 rattlesnakes and 4 or 5 copperheads. Boy, that was something else. I tell you, those snakes, I never did like snakes.
Seems the Summerfords are breeding deadly rattlers. Not for fun, but for their faith. Darlene's husband, Glenn Summerford, is the local preacher in Scottsboro. The latest in a long line of Summerfords to whip his worshipers into a frenzy.
Brothers and sisters, praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. Hear our prayer tonight.
He could preach. I mean, everybody would get excited.
Because why?
But he could preach, that's for sure.
But for Glenn Summerford, prayers alone are not enough to prove his devotion to the Lord.
By taking up serpents, it will show their love to the Lord. To anybody who's ready to show their right with God.
What the serpent hunters say is that when you pick up a serpent, you actually have death in your hand.
Remember, there is death in these here boxes. This ain't for show.
And it's up to God whether you live or die.
Glenn is a serpent handler, preaching in the Church of God with signs following.
Who is ready to show their right with God?
They believe that you can pick up a serpent, and if he bites you, and if you really have the faith, you won't die.
You are a true believer, my friend.
For more than a century, snake handling has been a powerful tradition here in Appalachia. A deadly ritual built around a passage from the Gospel of Mark.
Shall speak in tongues.
It says, they shall cast in my name, they shall cast out devils, they shall speak in new tongues, they shall take up serpents, they shall lay hands upon the sick, and they shall recover.
Glenn Summerford first took up the serpent 8 years earlier. The charismatic preacher soon has his wife, Darlene, and the rest of the congregation under his spell.
Well, I believed it because I ain't never been to church much until I started going like that. I picked up snakes, and everybody else started picking up snakes.
People like powerful, charismatic figures, they have to be fairly charismatic because you've got to be able to not only preach the word, but do it in a fashion to compel others to do it. It's a very experientially, emotionally based thing.
Professor Ralph Hood from the University of Tennessee has studied snake handling for 40 years. He says only a chosen few can take up the serpent.
Take the serpent.
The majority of people in a serpent-handling church don't handle serpents.
You are a true believer, my friend.
Most serpent-handling churches says what you must do is wait upon the anointing of the Holy Spirit. And if the Holy Spirit anoints you, then handle a serpent. But if not, then you don't take up a serpent.
Wrestling with rattlesnakes is just part of the potent ceremony.
Well, the music is superb, and in fact, it's like the Pentecostal tradition. It's unimaginable that you can have a serpent-handling church without good music.
The music, the adrenaline, the danger turns this into a powerful way to pray.
Every serpent-handling church will say something like, I don't know why you're here, but I came to praise the Lord.
You come from the world?
And so I think the people that make it in the serpent-handling tradition are not the academic type, not the textbook, arguing type, but they're people who can use the Bible charismatically.
Glenn's worship is not only dangerous, it's illegal.
It's the only Christian biblically based ritual that is banned in every state that it's been practiced in, with the exception of West Virginia.
Holding death in the palm of your hand can be very intoxicating. Darlene says Glenn became obsessed with this dangerous ritual, wrestling with rattlesnakes night after night.
I want to hear you say it.
They just got possessed by it.
Is your heart open for the Lord?
I guess I did too. That's what I believe.
Then one cool October night, their temptation turns darker when Darlene is bitten by a deadly rattler.
It takes everything out of you when you get snake bit. And I just kept praying and praying. And I was just expecting to die any time.
Did Darlene Summerford succumb to her husband's obsession? She wouldn't be the first to be tempted by a serpent.
Oh, God, it hurt.
All manner of bizarre tales emerge from the Appalachian Mountains. But for veteran detective Lieutenant Clarence Bolt, this is one of the strangest.
Very unusual. Very unusual. When you get into law enforcement, one of the first things you learn, don't be surprised at what you find. Because you're going to find things that are stranger than you'll ever see.
Alabama pastor Glenn Summerford tussles with killer snakes to prove his devotion to the Lord.
They believe If he bites you, and if you really have the faith, you won't die.
Now his wife Darlene has been bitten twice by deadly rattlesnakes. And she tells cops it was no mishap. It was attempted murder.
I think most of them I was just kind of blank at first, wondering what have we got here?
Scottsboro police grill Glenn Summerford about what happened that night. He says Darlene is way too friendly with their flock, and he doesn't like it.
You know, he was the pastor of the church, and he was just so jealous of me.
The pastor says his wife was cheating.
He said I was running around on him. He accused me of running around with everybody. But I didn't do it. I didn't run around on him.
Glenn has secrets of his own. He is also in a deadly wrestle with a demon drink.
Then he started back drinking, and he'd get drunk and go to church.
And in his deep, dark past, Glenn was no choir boy.
He was a pretty rough character. He'd been arrested a few times for various and sundry things. Glenn could be very violent at almost any time.
Jealousy and rage washed down with hard liquor?
I spoke to him on the phone.
It's a toxic cocktail that turns this good Christian household into a living hell.
And I'd go to church with black eyes or broke nose or whatever.
Darlene says a drunken Glenn would beat her, then try to cover his tracks.
He'd tell him I had a car wreck, or the horse hit me in the eye, or he'd say I fell or something, you know. He was drinking a lot, going to church, and that wasn't right.
On October 4th, 1991, it all comes to a head.
He was fussing at her, claiming that she had been having an affair.
Glenn tells cops Darlene had devised a dark exit plan from their fractured marriage.
He claims he was going to sleep, and the wife was actually going to bring a serpent and have it bite him.
Instead, the rattler bites Darlene.
Oh my God!
Tonight, God is on Glenn's side.
When serpent handlers put the serpent back in the box, they often say, thank God for this victory, that they were not bit.
But Darlene tells detectives a very different version of this slippery tale. She says it was Glenn who was cheating, and he wanted out of their marriage. There's just one problem.
You can't get a divorce, because in the serpent hunting tradition, if you're divorced, you can't preach.
Glenn has developed an insatiable appetite for his dance with death.
That's all of them preached about was snake handling, over and over every night.
He refuses to give up his dark temptation. Instead, Glenn decides to use his tools of worship as a weapon.
If she was dead from a serpent bite, then he would be free and still be able to preach.
On the night of October 4th, he takes Darlene out back at gunpoint.
Off that limb.
They went out to where the snakes were. She told me that He wanted her to stick her face down in there.
And it's your face or your hand.
But she said, if I do, then I'll die for sure. She said, I decided I would stick my hand down in there.
In it. Put it in there.
And this one snake bit her.
By now, rattlesnake venom is coursing through Darlene's blood.
I was scared, and I was getting real weak, you know. It takes everything out of you when you get snake bit.
Glenn refuses to help his ailing wife. So all Darlene has left is her faith.
All night long, I just kept praying and praying. I was just expecting to die any time.
They say the Lord works in mysterious ways. And in the fall of 1991, in the southern Appalachians, Darlene Summerford has just survived the night after a deadly snake bite.
It was a miracle. A miracle. If I hadn't been praying and God hadn't been with me, I would have died.
The next morning, her husband Glenn promises to drive her to the hospital. Instead, they go to the video store, where the clerk notices the swelling on Darlene's arm.
You all right?
He said if I take him tapes back in there and say something about it, he would shoot me. He had a gun right there. He would have done it. He's crazy, and I believed him.
Glenn drives Darlene home,
Right, don't blame Daddy.
then forces her to write a suicide note to their son.
Because I love him.
He's making me write it. Said, I'm gonna kill myself.
Why the fake suicide note?
You write it down now.
Because Glenn's not done yet.
I said, I thought you were taking me to the hospital. And he looked at me real evil looking, and he said,
You ain't going nowhere, dog.
I'm not taking you nowhere. He said, you're gonna die tonight.
Her husband wants to replay last night's horror.
We went outside, and we went back to the shed.
You better start praying, Darlene. We're gonna die.
As a serpent handler, Glenn believes faith will protect you from the poison.
Come on!
But he wants this parishioner to suffer.
She claimed that not only did he force her hand into a box, but he also agitated the serpent.
And it made it mad, really mad.
Put your hand in there! Come on! Pick it up!
And when I reached down to pick it up, it bit me. And I kept praying and crying and praying and crying and praying.
She's herded back to the house, not sure if she'll ever leave.
He said, if you get off that couch, I'll make sure you're dead. I'll shoot you.
You try and get off that couch and I'll blow your brains out.
The preacher prepares to watch his wife die. But all that booze has taken its toll.
And then he got real sleepy. I reckon the Lord put a sleeping spell on him or something.
Darlene seizes her chance and calls for help. Then scrambles to get as far from the house as possible.
Well, I started crawling,
Man, are you all right?
And then finally I seen some lights coming.
He's gonna kill me.
They met her. She told them what had happened, and they put her in the ambulance and carried her to the hospital.
Detectives believe Darlene. In 26 years of police work, Lieutenant Clarence Bolt has seen a lot of peculiar crimes, but never an assault with a deadly rattler.
What stands out the most unique part of it, just the fact that he used the rattlesnakes to do the job, to try to do the job.
Reverend Glenn Summerford is arrested and charged with attempted murder.
Glenn Summerford, in his own defense, claimed that was not true.
Even now, the enigmatic preacher holds sway over his fervent flock. Glenn's parishioners post bail, refusing to believe Darlene's story.
They thought all the time she was lying.
Scottsboro is divided. Was it Darlene or Glenn who reached for a deadly serpent to solve their problems?
The claim is that maybe both were drinking. They had clearly a period of huge domestic turmoil, and this brought it to a head. And why at this particular moment, I don't know, but clearly they had a history of domestic difficulty, to put it mildly.
In the end, it's up to a jury to decide. Glenn Summerford's trial lasts just 2 days in the Jackson County Courthouse.
He was actually convicted of attempted murder. So Darlene's story is the one that the jury bought.
They shall take up serpents.
Well, it was a relief. If they hadn't found him guilty, that would have been wrong.
Glenn Summerford will take up the serpent no more. He is sentenced to life in prison. As for his dark temptation, serpent handling still thrives in the Appalachians.
It's between Glenn, his life, and God, what happened. It's clear it was a messed up issue of domestic violence, but it doesn't characterize the serpent handling tradition.
These days, Darlene won't set foot inside a house of worship.
I don't go to church nowhere. They really let me down.
Locals are still arguing about who was to blame that night.
A lot of people felt that he got what he deserved. A lot of them said, well, she's the pot calling the kettle black. My opinion is this: I don't care how good of a person you are, you break the law, you pay for it.
In the end, the Summerfords' temptation for this deadly ritual tainted them both. On the south coast of England, 2002, the town of Bournemouth is waking up. Rows of townhouses bustle with families preparing for the day. Heather Barnett has her brood under control.
You guys ready yet?
Yes, Mum. Well, it was a Tuesday, and like any other family, they had their morning rituals. Mum getting ready for the school rat run, shouting, you know, come on, we've got to go.
The single mom is devoted to her 11-year-old daughter and 14-year-old son.
She was known as a really loving, caring mother.
With the school run finished, Heather finally begins her day.
She was a seamstress, working from home. She was very popular. She didn't have to advertise for her work. and she was making enough to be able to provide for her children.
Heather's usually still working when her kids return home from school. But this afternoon, her sewing machine is strangely dormant.
Mom.
They let themselves in, and the boy says that he was immediately struck by a kind of eeriness, a silence. The daughter called out, "Mum? Where are you, Mum?" And there was no answer. And then just noticed the bathroom door closed.
Their mother is dead.
At that same time, a man and woman who lived almost opposite turned up in their car and hurried over to them and said, "Come on, calm down. I'll look after you. We'll look after you."
As the friendly neighbors comfort the children, police race to the scene.
When her children found her, she was laying on the bathroom floor. Both her breasts had been removed with a sharp knife-type instrument, and they'd been placed on the floor.
Detective Inspector Jez Noyce helped investigate the murder. The brutality of the attack shocks him to his core. And there's something else. The murderer has left a very odd calling card.
Why had the killer put that there? We just didn't know.
But Detective Noyce will get to know this killer. And the dark temptations of this crime will come to haunt his nights. Imagine living on a quiet English street, a safe, secure place where neighbors are friends, and your kids play happily on the sidewalk. Until one morning, the peace is shattered.
We'd never come across a crime scene like this. It was not something that we'd really come across in the UK at all.
48-year-old mother of two, Heather Barnett, murdered, mutilated in the safety of her own home. The front doors in this community are quickly deadlocked.
They were very shocked. Heather was a well-known person. She was much loved. The community wasn't sure, was this a killer that was out there that was going to pick on other people and target other women in their homes?
Why was this gentle mother the subject of such brutality?
Her body was laying on the floor. She was face up. Her bra had been cut through between the cups, and her jeans and pants had been pulled down slightly. Inside her pants, there were some blood-stained glove marks, which suggested the killer had some sort of sexual motivation.
There are no signs of forced entry to the house. Did Heather know her attacker? Forensics experts search the crime scene.
Just outside the bathroom, there was a clear footprint of a trainer in blood on the floor.
It's not a fingerprint, but police hope to trace the bloody shoe that made it. There is one other clue. Clumps of hair in the victim's hands, and they've been carefully cut.
This was the beginning of what was to be some of the most mystifying aspects of this case.
Even stranger, Heather's left hand holds a clump of her own hair, while her right holds hair from someone else.
The killer had clearly put that there deliberately.
At crime scenes, we talk about signatures. Signatures are very important.
For criminal psychologist Dr. Eric Hickey, a signature like this is the work of a unique killer.
This is the first time in my career where I've come across someone who has killed someone and taken the hair of another victim and placed it beside this victim. That's a very unusual psychological statement.
This was a definite calling card. What does it mean? What is this killer telling us? Where do we go from this?
Where do you go? How about the darkest underworld of all?
When you have a killing of this nature, which is so abnormal, so bizarre, thoughts of satanic rituals immediately came to mind.
Was this the work of a satanic cult? The country around Bournemouth is rich with the history of pagan rituals. Tales of druids' circles and witches' covens meeting in the dead of the night.
There'd been lots of satanic violence against animals. And so there was this thought, could this be something to do with a witch's coven?
Adding to the witch theory, the attack seems sexual, yet there is no evidence of rape. Could a woman have done this?
There was this theory that it could have been a crazed woman and she could have had her hair pulled out or cut it off herself and left it as a calling card.
The investigation keeps circling back to the killer's calling card. Strands of hair placed so carefully with such symbolism. If it's not a satanic ritual, is this another kind of dark temptation?
Somebody who's got that strong fetish, clearly a strong sexual fetish in relation to hair.
Police scour the records for evidence of other similar hair-cutting attacks. But nothing comes up. They also conduct door-to-door inquiries in the neighborhood. Just opposite Heather's home, police talk to Danilo Restivo and his wife, the neighbors who first comforted Heather's children after they found their mother. The officers ask a routine question. What did you wear that day?
When it came to the shoes, he explained that the shoes he'd been wearing on the day were in fact, he'd washed them and that they'd been in bleach. And the officers at that time, they thought that was rather suspicious.
Police take the shoes as evidence and find the sneakers match the footprint found in Heather's home. But the bleach has destroyed any DNA. It's not enough to link Restivo to the murder. And there are still no answers to the mystery of the hair in Heather's hands. But those sneakers are more than enough to take a closer look at Danilo Restivo.
Restivo was an oddball. He was a social misfit.
Everybody who knew him and met him said there was something strange about him, something odd. They couldn't put a finger on it, but he didn't mix. He didn't get on with people.
Detectives delve into Restivo's past. He'd recently immigrated from the Italian city of Potenza. And from those streets come stories that send chills through the English detectives.
In Potenza, he was known as the hair cutter. He was known in the community as someone that sat behind girls on buses and cut locks of their hair surreptitiously.
Back in the UK, the women of Bournemouth also tell tales of a creepy commuter.
We had a number of girls come forward saying that they had their hair cut. Some of them subsequently identified Restivo as being the culprit.
Is Restivo just a harmless oddball who collects hair?
You don't just wake up one day and say, oh, I think I like hair today. This is something that had been developed for quite some time.
Criminal psychologist Eric Hickey says a hair fetish has deep, dark roots in the past.
There was something that they were pairing when they were younger, where they touched hair, and it was important to them. It had purpose. And as they get older then they think of the hair and they masturbate to the hair.
The fetish can start with collecting hair as trophies. But that close contact can fuel a much darker temptation.
The question is, would he escalate from that? Well, whenever you cross boundary lines and you approach people and you touch them inappropriately without their permission, you've opened up the possibility of further and more serious assaults.
A growing obsession with hair, a matching shoe print, and he lives right across the street from the murder. Danilo Restivo is now the prime suspect. Detectives begin watching him 24 hours a day.
We were concerned that he had the potential to attack and kill someone else.
Danger may be closer than police think. A dark desire is boiling up inside Danilo Restivo.
This guy was a psycho at his prime. And a psycho at his prime is lethal.
May 2004. In the south of England, police have a round-the-clock watch on a dangerous man.
This guy was a psycho at his prime. And a psycho at his prime is lethal.
Danilo Restivo is the prime suspect in the brutal murder of Heather Barnett. A man racked with dark temptations. What will his obsession make him do next?
The surveillance officers saw him paying particular interest to lone female walkers. And on one occasion, he was seen to bend down and almost hide in the bushes as a woman walked past him. And they were very, very concerned at that point that he was going to attack someone else.
As he leaves the park, police pull him over, pretending it's a routine traffic stop.
The officers found a large filleting knife. They found some scissors. They also found some tape and some gloves.
A suspicious haul, but not illegal. It's still not enough to charge Danilo Restivo with murder.
They had this feeling he was almost laughing at them. He was saying, come on, I'm smarter than you. There's no way you're ever gonna get me.
And for 6 years, it seems Restivo is right. Until 2010, when English police take a call from authorities in Restivo's hometown of Potenza, Italy. Something strange has surfaced in a local church.
Workmen had been investigating a leak to the roof of the church and gone up into the loft space. And in the far end of the loft, they found a partly mummified, partly skeletal body. It was clear from the glasses and from the jewellery and the clothing that it was going to be Elisa Clapps's body.
Elisa Claps is a 16-year-old girl who went missing back in 1993. She was a schoolmate of Danilo Restivo.
He was a few years older than her, and he had pestered her. He had asked her out a couple of occasions, but she had refused and said she wasn't interested in him.
Elisa eventually agrees to meet Danilo at their local church.
And that was the last time that anybody had ever seen Elisa. She disappeared from view and had never been found.
At the time, Restivo said Elisa left the church before him, and he never saw her again. But when forensics examine her remains, they tell a different story. Elisa's shocking injuries are strikingly similar to those of Heather Barnett.
Elisa had been stabbed 10 or 12 times. She had also had her bra cut. Her trousers and underwear were pulled open and pulled down slightly, in exactly the same way that Heather had been left.
And the clincher? In the palm of Elisa's hand, Restivo's signature.
Elisa's hair had been cut after death, and a lock had been put into one of her hands as well.
The puzzle is almost complete. DNA provides the final piece.
The forensic scientists in the UK were able to identify to the man that blood on that murder site in Italy came from Danilo Restivo.
On May 20th, 2010, more than 7 years after Heather Barnett's brutal death, Danilo Restivo is charged with her murder. During the trial, the prosecution tells how Heather's final desperate moments might have played out. Heather knew Danilo. He had visited the week before, asking her to sew curtains for his wife. But on November 12, 2002, he has something else in mind.
From that moment, it was all over. He rained her with a series of blows with a hammer to her head until she was just battered to a pulp. And then dragged into the bathroom to be mutilated to suit his sexual satisfaction.
Restivo won't admit to killing Heather, but he does admit to cutting hair.
He has said in court that the reason he did it ultimately is he enjoyed the smell and the feel of girls' hair.
That enjoyment eventually grew into an uncontrollable dark temptation.
He always took women's hair because he was sexually attracted to women.
Hair had to come from a woman, and he had to get it against her will. The attacking and the killing and the cutting became part and parcel of that fetish.
There's something about these women where he's seeking intimacy, and the hair is significant in having that intimacy.
I think he'd put hair in the victim's hand as a means of saying, we've been together. And it's a way of connecting the two of them.
And the darkest twist of all, Restivo had watched Heather's children for weeks and knew what time they'd return home. He made sure he was there to revel in their anguish.
And that was his grand finale. I've done it. The warped mind of that man is hard to imagine.
They were obviously very traumatized by what they'd seen because of the state of Heather's body.
The daughter, years later, she was to reveal that it was a good 6 months before she could be got to go into any bathroom. She would quiver and shake whenever she saw a bathroom door or what was beyond that bathroom door. Because the moment she did, it brought back all the mental images of that moment she arrived home from school.
He was obviously an evil man, somebody that would be prepared to allow two small children, an 11-year-old and 14-year-old, to find their mother butchered on the bathroom floor, was somebody who is, as I say, an evil person.
The jury finds Danilo Restivo guilty, and the judge delivers a harsh sentence: life, with no chance of parole for 40 years. Restivo is also found guilty of murdering Elisa Claps. If he is ever released in Britain, he will have a 30-year term waiting to begin in Italy. And what about the stranger's hair left in Heather Barnett's hand? Its owner was never identified.
Although we identified a number of people who had had their hair cut, and we did one-to-one comparisons with DNA, we were never able to establish whose hair that was. We got an analysis done of this lock of hair, and we got a professor at Reading University to analyse the isotopic content of it. And he was able to say that the person whose hair that was, before it had been cut, had travelled to northern Spain and to the Orlando area of Florida in the weeks and months preceding the hair being cut. But unfortunately, we still didn't identify who the owner of that hair was.
Was it from yet another victim? Danilo Restivo refuses to tell. He still denies his dark temptation led him to murder.
I don't think anybody is ever going to really get to the bottom of the motive and the working of the mind of this terrible man. Because he'll go to the grave still denying that he did it.